I watched Dr. Richard Holloway inject poison into the IV lines of 14 patients over the course of 6 months. I documented every murder, every falsified chart, every manipulated dose. When I finally reported him to the hospital board, they didn't investigate him. They fired me for unprofessional conduct and had me blacklisted from every hospital in the state. He called me hysterical, unstable, a woman scorned. The medical community believed him. After all, he was a renowned cardiac surgeon, and I was just a night shift nurse with a history of emotional instability that he had carefully created in my personnel file. But Dr. Holloway made one fatal mistake. He underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose can accomplish. I am Rebecca Torres. I am 42 years old, and today, after 3 years of living in my car and sacrificing everything I had, I'm going to tell you how I brought down one of the most respected doctors in America and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of hospital administration. Before I begin, thank you for being here. If you believe that truth matters more than power, that justice is worth any sacrifice, you're in the right place. Please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It gives me strength to know I'm not alone. Now let me tell you about the monster who hid behind a white coat and the system that protected him. My name is Rebecca Torres, and for 18 years, I was exactly what I'd always dreamed of being. A registered nurse in the Cardiac Intensive Care Unit at St. Augustine Medical Center in Baltimore, Maryland. It wasn't glamorous work, 12-hour night shifts, the constant beep of monitors, the weight of life and death in every decision, but it was sacred work. I had wanted to be a nurse since I was 8 years old, when a kind nurse held my hand through my mother's final hours after a car accident. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in East Baltimore, the youngest of 3 daughters raised by a single father who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. My father, Manuel Torres, was a mechanic by day and a janitor by night. He never finished high school, but he had a wisdom that no classroom could teach. Mija, he used to tell me, the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do when they see something wrong. That lesson would cost me everything, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I put myself through nursing school working as a medical assistant, graduated at the top of my class, and landed my dream job at St. Augustine in 2005. It was one of the premier cardiac centers on the East Coast, a place where cutting-edge research met compassionate care, or so I thought. The CICU was my world. I knew every piece of equipment, every protocol, every attending physician's preferences. My colleagues called me the sergeant because of my attention to detail and my refusal to cut corners, even when we were understaffed and overwhelmed. I loved my patients fiercely. Most of them came to us in the worst moments of their lives, hearts failing, bodies betraying them, fear consuming them. I held their hands during procedures. I called their families with updates. I stayed late to make sure they weren't alone when they were scared. Some lived, and their gratitude made every sleepless night worthwhile. Some died, and I grieved for each one as if they were family. That's why what happened in the fall of 2020 nearly destroyed me. It wasn't just the murders. It was the betrayal of everything I believed medicine stood for. Dr. Richard Holloway joined St. Augustine's surgical team in August 2020. He came with an impeccable resume: Johns Hopkins Medical School, surgical residency at Massachusetts General, fellowships in cardiothoracic surgery in London and Zurich. He'd published over 50 papers, pioneered new minimally invasive techniques, and had a list of awards that filled 2 pages. At 52, he was at the peak of his career, and St. Augustine had recruited him aggressively, offering him the position of chief of cardiac surgery and a salary that was rumored to be close to $2 million a year. I remember the first time I met him. It was during morning rounds, and he swept into the CICU with an entourage, 2 residents, a fellow, and the hospital's CEO, Dr. Patricia Wendell, who followed him around like he was visiting royalty. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed even under his white coat. He had the kind of commanding presence that made people straighten their posture when he entered a room. He stopped at the bedside of Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, an 68-year-old woman recovering from a triple bypass he'd performed the day before. "How's our star patient?" he asked, his voice warm and reassuring. Mrs. Pritchard smiled weakly. "Better, doctor, thanks to you." "Nonsense," he said, patting her hand. "You did all the hard work? I just gave your heart a little help." He glanced at me. "And you are?" "Rebecca Torres, night shift charge nurse," I replied. "Ah, the famous Sergeant Torres," he said with a smile. "I've heard about your legendary standards. We're going to work well together, I can tell." I should have trusted my first instinct. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his smile. Something cold, calculating, assessing. But I dismissed it. I'd worked with dozens of surgeons over the years, and most of them had egos the size of operating theaters. It came with the territory. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Dr. Holloway's surgical outcomes were excellent. His patients recovered faster than expected. His innovation in the OR was impressive, and his bedside manner was impeccable. The hospital administration was thrilled with their new star surgeon. But then, in late September, something changed. It started with small things that only someone with my experience would notice. Medications that should have been ordered weren't. Charts that didn't quite add up. Patients who seemed to be doing well suddenly deteriorating for no clear reason. The first death was Mr. James Corbett, a 71-year-old retired teacher who'd undergone a successful valve replacement. His recovery had been textbook perfect for 5 days. Then, on my shift, his blood pressure suddenly plummeted. Within minutes, he was coding. We worked on him for 40 minutes, but we couldn't bring him back. The autopsy report listed the cause as sudden cardiac event, post-surgical complication. It was tragic but not unusual in cardiac surgery. These things happened, even with the best care. I grieved for Mr. Corbett and his devastated wife, but I accepted it as one of those heartbreaking realities of ICU nursing. But then, 2 weeks later, it happened again. Mrs. Linda Waverly, 65, recovering from a coronary artery bypass. Perfect recovery for 3 days, then a sudden catastrophic arrhythmia during my shift. We lost her too. 2 deaths in 2 weeks, both Dr. Holloway's patients, both on my shift. I started to feel cursed. The third death was what made me start paying closer attention. Mr. Thomas Reed, 58, a high school principal with a wife and 3 teenagers. His surgery had been complicated but successful. He was doing so well that Dr. Holloway was talking about discharging him in a few days. That night, I was checking on Mr. Reed around 2 a.m. He was sleeping peacefully, all his vitals stable and strong. I documented everything in his chart and moved on to the next patient. 20 minutes later, his monitor alarm went off. Severe bradycardia. His heart rate was dropping rapidly. I ran to his room and found Dr. Holloway already there, standing by Mr. Reed's IV pole. "I was just checking on him when this started," Dr. Holloway said, his voice tight with concern. "Call the code team." I hit the code button and started chest compressions while Dr. Holloway prepared medications. The code team arrived within minutes, but despite everything we did, Mr. Reed died at 2:47 a.m. It was during the code that I noticed something strange. There was a syringe on the floor near the IV pole, partially hidden under the bedside table. I picked it up. It was empty, with no label, which was a serious protocol violation. All syringes were supposed to be labeled with the medication and the nurse's initials. "Whose syringe is this?" I asked, holding it up. Dr. Holloway glanced at it briefly. "Oh, that's mine. I gave him some potassium earlier. His levels were low. Must have dropped it." But that didn't make sense. I'd just checked Mr. Reed's labs an hour before, and his potassium was normal. And why would Dr. Holloway be administering medications himself at 2 a.m. instead of ordering them through the nursing staff, which was standard protocol? I didn't say anything in the moment. You don't question an attending physician in the middle of a code. But later, after Mr. Reed's body had been taken to the morgue and his weeping family had been notified, I went back to his chart. His potassium level from 10 p.m. had been 4.2, perfectly normal. There had been no order for supplemental potassium. And Dr. Holloway's name wasn't on the sign-in sheet for the unit. He shouldn't have been there at all. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I pulled the charts for Mr. Corbett and Mrs. Waverly and started comparing them. Both had died of sudden cardiac events during my shift. Both had been Dr. Holloway's patients. Both had been doing well before their sudden deteriorations, and in both cases, I found documentation gaps, missing nursing notes from the hour before their codes, unexplained medication discrepancies, subtle irregularities that would be easy to miss unless you were specifically looking for them. I went to my supervisor, Linda Marshall, the CICU nurse manager. "Linda, I need to talk to you about something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm concerned about a pattern I'm seeing with some of Dr. Holloway's post-op patients." Linda looked up from her computer, already defensive. "What kind of pattern?" I laid out what I'd found. The 3 deaths, the timing, the irregularities in the charts. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from concerned to uncomfortable to hostile. "Rebecca," she said when I finished, "what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," I said carefully. "I'm just saying there are some inconsistencies that should be investigated. Maybe there's a simple explanation, but nothing," Linda interrupted, her voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what you're implying?" Dr. Holloway is one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. The hospital recruited him specifically to elevate our cardiac program. And you want to investigate him because 3 post-surgical patients died? "Rebecca, this is a cardiac ICU. People die here. It's tragic, but it's not suspicious. But the chart irregularities can be explained by documentation errors during crisis situations," Linda said firmly. "The hospital is already under intense scrutiny from regulators. The last thing we need is a conspiracy theory from a nurse who's been working too many night shifts." "Drop it, Rebecca." "That's an order. I should have dropped it. I should have listened to the warning in Linda's voice. But I couldn't, because 5 nights later, I watched Dr. Richard Holloway murder another patient, and this time I saw everything. Her name was Sarah Chen, a 44-year-old mother of 2 young boys, recovering from an emergency bypass after a massive heart attack. She'd been stable for 6 days, her prognosis excellent. She was scheduled to move to a regular room in the morning. I was at the nurse's station at 3:15 a.m., finishing up some charting, when I saw Dr. Holloway enter the unit. He wasn't signed in, wasn't in scrubs. He was wearing street clothes under his white coat, as if he'd just come from outside. "Dr. Holloway," I said, standing. "I wasn't aware you were coming in. Is something wrong?" "Just wanted to check on a few patients," he said smoothly. "Couldn't sleep, decided to make rounds. It was unusual, but not unheard of. Dedicated surgeons sometimes came in at odd hours to check on their patients." "Do you need me to accompany you?" I asked. "No, that's fine. Keep up the good work." He walked toward Sarah Chen's room. Something in my gut told me to follow him. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, but I quietly moved to where I could see into Sarah's room through the glass door. Dr. Holloway was checking her IV lines, his back to the door. I watched him pull a syringe from his coat pocket, a syringe he'd brought with him, not taken from the medication cart. I watched him inject something into her IV line, directly into the port, bypassing any pumps or monitors. My heart started pounding. I pulled out my phone and started recording through the glass. Dr. Holloway stood there for a moment, watching Sarah's monitor. Then he adjusted her IV flow rate, marked something on her chart, and left the room. He saw me as he exited. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, calculation, something predatory. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual smooth charm. "Mrs. Chen is doing beautifully," he said. should have an excellent outcome. What did you just give her? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Oh, just a small dose of morphine. She seemed uncomfortable. Didn't want to wake you for such a small thing. But Sarah hadn't been uncomfortable. I'd checked on her 30 minutes ago. She'd been sleeping peacefully, pain level 0 out of 10. And morphine administration required documentation, an order, a witness for controlled substances. None of that had happened. I'll need to document that in her chart, I said. Of course, he said smoothly. I'll write the order retroactively. Good night, Nurse Torres. He left and I stood there, my hands shaking, my phone still recording. I went immediately to Sarah's room. She was still sleeping, vitals still stable. I checked every setting on her monitors, documented everything. And then I did something I'd never done before. I drew a small blood sample from her IV line before the medication could fully metabolize, labeled it with the date and time, and put it in my pocket. Then I waited. Sarah coded at 4:17 a.m. Sudden cardiac arrest, massive arrhythmia. We worked on her for an hour. We couldn't save her. She died at 5:23 a.m., and I had to call her husband and tell him that his wife, the mother of his 2 young boys, was gone. While the code team was cleaning up and the attending physician was completing the death documentation, I slipped the blood sample into my bag. Then I went to the security office. I need to see the footage from CICU room 412 from 3 Yao to 3:30 a.m., I told the night security guard. Mike Rodriguez, who I'd known for years. Why? Something wrong? I just need to verify something for a chart. He pulled it up. We watched Dr. Holloway enter the room, approach Sarah's IV, appear to inject something, and leave. Can you make me a copy of that footage? I asked. Mike hesitated. Rebecca, if this is for anything official, you need to go through proper channels. It's for my own records. Patient safety concern. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I didn't do this, he said, handing me a USB drive 20 minutes later. I went home that morning as the sun was rising, and I didn't sleep. I had video footage of Dr. Holloway administering an unauthorized medication to a patient who died 2 hours later. I had a blood sample that could be tested. I had 4 deaths in 6 weeks, all following the same pattern. I called the Maryland Board of Physicians. I called the hospital CEO's office. I called the police department's non-emergency line. Each time I was told the same thing. File a formal complaint through proper channels. So I did. I wrote a detailed report documenting everything I'd observed, attaching copies of the charts, descriptions of the irregularities, and a detailed timeline. I included the video footage. I hand-delivered it to the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Raymond Foster, and requested a formal investigation. 48 hours later, I was called into a meeting with Dr. Foster, Linda Marshall, and Patricia Wendell, the hospital CEO. Rebecca, Dr. Wendell began, her voice cold. We've reviewed your complaint against Dr. Holloway. These are extraordinarily serious allegations. Yes, ma'am, I said. That's why I felt obligated to report them. The problem, Dr. Foster said, is that we've investigated, and we found no merit to your claims. The deaths you reference were all post-surgical complications, thoroughly reviewed by our mortality committee. The video footage shows Dr. Holloway providing appropriate patient care. And the irregularities you cite are minor documentation issues that occur regularly in high-stress environments. I stared at him. He administered an unauthorized medication to a patient who died 2 hours later. I watched him do it. You watched him provide morphine to a patient in pain, Linda corrected, which he documented appropriately. She wasn't in pain. I'd just assessed her. Your assessment, Dr. Wendell interrupted, may have been incomplete. Dr. Holloway has decades of experience. When he says a patient needed pain medication, we trust his clinical judgment. And the blood sample I drew, you drew an unauthorized blood sample? Dr. Foster leaned forward. That's a HIPAA violation, Rebecca. That's theft of medical materials. That's potentially criminal. The room tilted. I was gathering evidence. You were violating patient privacy and hospital protocol, Dr. Wendell said. We've also been made aware of other concerning behaviors. Dr. Holloway has reported that you've been following him, watching him, making him uncomfortable with your attention. Linda says you've been working excessive overtime, that your documentation has become obsessive. There are concerns about your mental state. The blood drained from my face. That's not true. I'm trying to protect patients. Rebecca, Linda said. And there was something like pity in her voice. We're worried about you. You've been through a lot lately. Your father's death last year, your divorce. Don't, I said, my voice shaking. Don't use my personal life to discredit what I'm telling you. 4 patients are dead. And we grieve for each one, Dr. Wendell said. But post-surgical mortality happens. What doesn't happen is nurses making baseless accusations against world-renowned surgeons. We're placing you on immediate administrative leave, pending a psychiatric evaluation. If you're cleared to return to work, it will be with a formal reprimand in your file for unprofessional conduct and violation of patient privacy. You're protecting him, I said, standing. You know what he's doing, and you're protecting him because he brings in money and prestige. This meeting is over, Dr. Wendell said coldly. Security will escort you from the building. You're not to return to hospital property until you're cleared by our psychiatric consultant. 2 security guards appeared at the door, not Mike Rodriguez, but 2 I didn't know. They walked me out of the hospital where I'd worked for 18 years, past colleagues who wouldn't meet my eyes, past the CICU where I'd saved countless lives. I was humiliated, discredited, and unemployed. But I was also more certain than ever that I was right. That night, I took the blood sample I'd drawn from Sarah Chen to a private lab, paying out of pocket for a comprehensive toxicology screen. The results came back 3 days later. Massive levels of potassium chloride, far beyond any therapeutic dose. In high concentrations, potassium chloride causes immediate cardiac arrest. It's also almost impossible to detect in a standard post-mortem because potassium occurs naturally in the body. It was the perfect murder weapon for a cardiac surgeon. It looked like a natural heart complication. Unless someone knew to look for it, knew to draw blood immediately, it would never be found. I had proof. But I no longer had credibility. The hospital's psychiatric consultant, Dr. Helen Marsh, evaluated me a week later. She was professional, thorough, and clearly already convinced of her conclusion before I walked into her office. The hospital has shared concerning reports about your behavior, she said. Paranoid ideation, obsessive focus on a colleague, inability to accept normal patient mortality. They're worried you're experiencing a psychological break. I'm not, I said. I have evidence. Evidence that you obtained through illegal means, she interrupted. Rebecca, I've reviewed your file. Your father died suddenly last year. You went through a difficult divorce. You've been working 70-hour weeks. You're exhausted, grieving, and your judgment is impaired. The accusation you're making, it's classic projection. You're trying to make sense of loss by creating a narrative where someone is to blame. I have toxicology results. From a blood sample you stole, she said. Even if those results are accurate, which we have no way of verifying, the sample was obtained illegally. It would never be admissible anywhere. Rebecca, I'm going to recommend that you take a medical leave of absence. Get some rest, see a therapist, process your grief. When you're ready, we can discuss your return to work. I walked out of her office and sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour. Then I made a decision. If the system wouldn't help me, I would have to help myself. I became obsessed. I spent my days and nights researching Dr. Holloway, his career, his previous positions, his published papers. I tracked down hospitals where he'd worked before and requested public mortality data. I contacted medical boards in 3 states, and I found a pattern. At Johns Hopkins, where Dr. Holloway had worked for 12 years, there had been a cluster of unexpected post-surgical deaths during his final 2 years. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a formal investigation, but a slight uptick in mortality rates that had been noted in internal quality reviews. At Massachusetts General, during his residency, there had been a formal complaint filed by a nurse about inappropriate medication administration. The complaint had been dismissed, and the nurse had quietly resigned 6 months later. In London, during his fellowship, there had been whispers about his unusual patient outcomes, though nothing formal had ever been filed. The pattern was there if you knew to look for it. But it was subtle, distributed across years and institutions, easily dismissed as coincidence or the inherent risks of cardiac surgery. I tried to contact the nurse who'd filed the complaint at Mass General. I found her name, Patricia Kemp, but she'd moved to Oregon and wasn't returning my calls. Finally, I drove to Portland and showed up at her house. She opened the door, saw me standing there, and immediately tried to close it. "Please," I said, holding up my hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know, did Dr. Holloway kill patients at Mass General?" She stared at me for a long moment, her face pale. "Who are you?" "My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a nurse at St. Augustine Medical Center in Baltimore. I reported Dr. Holloway for patient deaths, and the hospital destroyed my career. I need to know if I'm crazy, or if he's done this before." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Come in," she said quietly. We talked for 3 hours. Patricia told me about 3 suspicious deaths during Dr. Holloway's residency, about her attempts to report him, about how the hospital had turned on her, questioned her competence, suggested she was having a romantic fantasy about Dr. Holloway that had turned vindictive when he rejected her. "They said I was obsessed with him," she said, wiping her eyes. "They said I was mentally unstable. I lost my job, my reputation. I couldn't get hired anywhere in Boston. I had to move across the country and start over. I've spent 20 years trying to forget it ever happened. Did you have proof?" I asked. "I thought I did," she said. "But it disappeared. Files went missing. Security footage was erased. The hospital protected him because he was brilliant, because he brought in grant money and prestige. One nurse's word against a rising star surgeon? There was no contest. How many people did he kill? I documented 7 deaths that I was certain were his. But there were others I suspected, maybe 15 total. My blood ran cold. And he just moved on to the next hospital." "That's what they do," Patricia said bitterly. "The hospital quietly lets them resign or facilitates a transfer, gives them a neutral reference, and sends them on to victimize people somewhere else. It's easier than the scandal of a formal investigation." "We have to stop him," I said. Patricia shook her head sadly. "You can't, I tried. It cost me everything, and he's still out there. He's more successful than ever. The system protects men like him. It always has." "Not this time," I said, but I was wrong. I tried everything over the next 3 months. I contacted medical boards, regulatory agencies, patient safety organizations. I sent my documentation to journalists at major newspapers. I posted about it on medical forums and social media. Nothing worked. The hospital had done its job well. I'd been effectively labeled as a disgruntled, mentally unstable former employee with an obsessive grudge. My psychiatric evaluation was leaked somehow, and suddenly I was the crazy nurse who'd had a breakdown and was making wild accusations. Dr. Holloway, meanwhile, continued to operate, continued to be celebrated, continued to kill. I tracked the death records at St. Augustine through public databases and identified 3 more suspicious post-surgical deaths in the 4 months after I was fired. I was running out of money. The psychiatric evaluation had made me virtually unhireable as a nurse. No hospital would touch me. I took a job at a retail pharmacy just to make rent, but I was barely surviving. My apartment was littered with charts, timelines, documentation. My ex-husband called me concerned, saying our daughters were worried about me. "You need to let this go, Becca," he said. "You're destroying yourself." He's killing people, I said. Then let the authorities handle it. The authorities won't listen. He sighed. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe these really were just complications. Maybe you saw a pattern that wasn't there because you were stressed and grieving. You don't believe me either, I said, and hung up. The breaking point came on a cold February night in 2021. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Patricia Kemp had been right. If there was no way to stop him. If I'd destroyed my life for nothing. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost didn't look at it. But something made me check. The headline made my heart stop. Renowned Baltimore surgeon, Dr. Richard Holloway receives Presidential Medal for Medical Innovation. There he was in the photo, shaking hands with the president, smiling that charming smile, being celebrated as one of America's greatest medical minds. I sat up in bed, something cold and hard settling into my chest. In that moment, I realized something. Playing by the rules wasn't working. The system was designed to protect people like Dr. Holloway. If I wanted justice, I would have to break every rule in the book. I would have to become the thing I'd spent my entire career being trained not to be, a criminal. The plan formed slowly, carefully over the course of several weeks. If the authorities wouldn't listen to a disgraced nurse, maybe they would listen to hard evidence obtained through unofficial channels. I needed access to Dr. Holloway's private records, his personal files, anything that might show a pattern of intentional harm. I needed evidence that even a conspiracy of hospital administrators couldn't dismiss. Breaking into St. Augustine Medical Center would be impossible. My badge had been deactivated and security knew my face. But Dr. Holloway had a private practice office in a medical building downtown, where he saw patients for consultations before surgery. I started watching the building. I learned the rhythms of the security, the cleaning crew schedule, the times when the building was most empty. And I waited for an opportunity. It came on a Friday night in March. The cleaning crew for Dr. Holloway's floor included a woman named Maria, who I'd met once at a nursing conference. I approached her in the parking lot. "Maria, I need your help," I said, "and I need you to hear me out before you say no." I told her everything. The deaths, the cover-up, my attempts to get help through proper channels. I showed her my documentation, Patricia Kemp's testimony, the toxicology results from Sarah Chen's blood. "Why are you telling me this?" Maria asked when I finished. "Because I need to get into Dr. Holloway's office. I need evidence that will finally make someone listen. And I need someone to let me in." Maria was quiet for a long time. Then, "My mother died during heart surgery 5 years ago. The doctors said it was a complication, but she was so healthy before. She was only 62. She met my eyes. Was it him?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But if you help me, maybe we can find out." That night, Maria let me into the building. I had 4 hours before the overnight security guard made his rounds. I went to Dr. Holloway's office and started searching. His computer was password protected, but he'd written his passwords in a small notebook in his desk drawer. Arrogant. Careless. I accessed his files and started downloading everything to a USB drive. Patient records, personal notes, financial documents. And then I found it. A folder labeled Research Data, containing spreadsheets tracking patient outcomes. Not official hospital records, but his own private documentation. It listed patient names, dates of surgery, dates of death, and a column labeled Dosage, with numbers that correlated exactly with potassium levels. He'd been documenting his own murders. Perhaps for research, perhaps to prove his own intelligence. Serial killers often kept trophies. There were 47 patients listed. 47 people he'd killed over the course of 15 years, across 4 different institutions. I sat in his office chair, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. This was it. This was the proof that couldn't be dismissed. I downloaded everything. Then I did something that might seem crazy. I took photos of his office, his desk, his personal effects. I wanted to document everything about this moment. And then I heard a noise in the hallway. Footsteps. Someone was coming. I shut down the computer, grabbed my bag, and looked around desperately for a hiding place. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. A key turned in the lock. Dr. Holloway walked in and turned on the light. We stared at each other across his office. "Nurse Torres," he said calmly. "I've been expecting you," my heart hammered. "You knew I'd come." "Of course," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've been watching you watching me. You're persistent, I'll give you that." He walked to his desk, saw his computer had been moved, his drawers opened. "And you found my records impressive. Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why kill them?" He smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen. "Because I could. Because in every surgery I hold life and death in my hands, and the power of that choice is intoxicating. Do you know what it's like to be worshipped as a god, Rebecca? To have people's lives depend on your skill, your brilliance? You're insane," I breathed. "No," he said. "I'm exceptional. There's a difference. I save hundreds of lives, Rebecca. Hundreds. The medical innovations I've pioneered have helped thousands of people worldwide. 47 deaths over 15 years? That's a rounding error. That's the price of my genius." "They were human beings. They were statistics," he interrupted. "And now you're one too. You should have stayed quiet, Rebecca. You had the chance. The hospital gave you a way out, a psychiatric diagnosis, a graceful exit. But you couldn't let it go." He pulled something from his coat pocket. A syringe, the same kind I'd watched him use on Sarah Chen. "Potassium chloride?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "You've done your homework," he said. "Fast, effective, looks like natural cardiac arrest. You'll be found in the morning. A troubled woman who broke into her former colleague's office and died of a heart attack brought on by stress and mental illness. Tragic but not suspicious. I sent the files already," I lied. "They're with journalists, federal prosecutors, the FBI. If anything happens to me—" "No, you didn't," he said confidently. "If you had, you wouldn't be here alone. You're desperate, Rebecca. You're completely out of options. That's why you're breaking the law, hoping to find something, anything that will make someone believe you." He took a step toward me. "No one's coming to save you." But he was wrong about one thing. I'd learned from my mistakes. The phone in my pocket had been recording since the moment he walked in, and I'd sent Maria a text before starting my search. "If I'm not out in 2 hours, call 911 and tell them there's an intruder at the medical building. I just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive." "You're right," I said, taking a step back. "No one believed me. But I'm not here for anyone else anymore. I'm here for them, for Sarah Chen and James Corbett and the 45 others whose names I just downloaded. I'm here because even if no one else cares about the truth, I do." "How noble," he said, "and how pointless." He moved toward me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from his desk and threw it at the window. The glass shattered, and the building alarm started shrieking. Dr. Holloway swore and lunged for me. We struggled. He was stronger, but I was desperate. The syringe fell to the floor. I kicked it away and ran. I made it to the stairwell before he caught me, grabbing my arm and spinning me around. But the alarm was screaming, and I heard voices shouting below. Security, responding to the break-in. "Let go of me." I screamed as loud as I could. "Help! He's trying to kill me!" Dr. Holloway's face contorted with rage. For the first time, the mask was completely off. This was the real man beneath the charm. Cold, calculating, murderous. "You stupid woman," he hissed. "You've ruined everything." Then we heard it. "Police! Come out with your hands up!" Maria had called 911, and my phone, still recording in my pocket, had captured everything. His confession, his attempt to kill me, all of it. Dr. Holloway released me and stepped back, and I watched his expression transform one final time from rage to the smooth, concerned demeanor of the respected surgeon. By the time the police reached us, he had his hands up, a confused expression on his face. "Officer, thank God you're here." This woman broke into my office. I came to check on the alarm and found her going through my files. When I tried to stop her, she attacked me. "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking but clear. My phone recorded everything. He confessed to murdering 47 patients. He tried to kill me with potassium chloride. The syringe is on the floor of his office. The officers looked between us, a renowned surgeon in an expensive suit and a disheveled woman with a documented psychiatric evaluation calling her mentally unstable. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one officer said to me. "Check my phone," I begged. "It's all recorded. And check his computer. He has files documenting every murder." "She's delusional," Dr. Holloway said smoothly. "She was fired from St. Augustine for making false accusations against me. She's been stalking me for months. I have documentation from the hospital's psychiatric consultant." "Then you won't mind if we check your computer," the second officer said, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. His nameplate read, "Officer James Chen, Sarah Chen's husband." Dr. Holloway's face went pale. He understood what I did in that moment. Officer Chen had never believed his wife's death was natural. He'd been waiting, watching, hoping for a chance to find the truth. "I'll need a warrant for that," Dr. Holloway said quickly. "Actually," Officer Chen said, "if Ms. Torres has recorded evidence of a crime in progress, that gives us probable cause. And if you've just confessed to murder on that recording, we have exigent circumstances." He looked at me. "May I see your phone?" I handed it to him with trembling hands. He hit play and Dr. Holloway's voice filled the stairwell. "Because I could. Because in every surgery, I hold life and death in my hands, and the power of that choice is intoxicating." Officer Chen's jaw clenched as he listened to the entire recording. When it finished, he looked at Dr. Holloway with an expression that was pure. "Cold fury, Dr. Richard Holloway," he said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Chen. You have the right to remain silent." I slid down the wall, my legs giving out, and started to cry. It was over. After months of being told I was crazy, after losing everything, after coming so close to death, it was finally over. But it was just beginning. The arrest of Dr. Richard Holloway became national news within hours. A renowned surgeon, a Presidential Medal recipient, arrested for serial murder. It was sensational, shocking, and impossible to ignore. The files I'd downloaded from his computer were examined by forensic experts. His private spreadsheet documented 47 murders across 15 years. But as investigators dug deeper, comparing his records to hospital mortality data, they found evidence of at least 63 suspicious deaths. The recorded confession was damning, but Dr. Holloway's lawyers immediately claimed I'd entrapped him, that the recording was inadmissible, that he'd been speaking hypothetically. They painted me as an obsessed stalker who'd manipulated a confused man. But then Patricia Kemp came forward. And after her, another nurse from Johns Hopkins. And then a physician assistant from London. And then more. A flood of people who'd seen things, suspected things, tried to report things, and been silenced. The media called it the hospital conspiracy. Not just one murderous doctor, but an entire system of prestigious medical institutions that had protected him, shuffled him along, valued reputation over patient safety. St. Augustine Medical Center was investigated by state and federal agencies. Dr. Patricia Wendell, the CEO, resigned. Dr. Raymond Foster, the chief medical officer, was fired. Linda Marshall, my former supervisor, gave a tearful interview saying she'd been pressured from above to dismiss my complaints. The Maryland Board of Physicians faced intense scrutiny for failing to act on multiple complaints over the years. Hospital administrators at 3 institutions were found to have knowingly facilitated Dr. Holloway's transfers, despite knowing about suspicious patient deaths. And I was vindicated. Completely. Publicly, undeniably vindicated. My psychiatric evaluation was revealed to have been conducted by a doctor on St. Augustine's payroll, specifically hired to discredit me. My nursing license was reinstated with an official apology. I received job offers from hospitals across the country, but I didn't want to go back to bedside nursing. I'd seen too much, been through too much. The system that should have protected patients had instead protected their killer. And I knew I wasn't the only healthcare worker who'd been silenced when they tried to speak up. Dr. Holloway's trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The files, the recording, the testimony of forensic pathologists who'd reviewed the cases, the witnesses who described his pattern of behavior. On October 15, 2022, he was convicted of 47 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was there in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Officer James Chen sat beside me, his hand gripping mine as we listened to justice finally being served for his wife and the 46 others. When Dr. Holloway was led away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. There was no charm left, no smooth mask, just hatred and the knowledge that he'd been beaten by just a nurse he'd tried to erase. But even with Dr. Holloway in prison, my work wasn't done. Because I knew there were others like him. Doctors, nurses, administrators who abused their power and the institutions that protected them. And I knew there were others like me, healthcare workers who'd tried to report wrongdoing and been destroyed for it. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I became an advocate. With the help of Patricia Kemp and other survivors of medical retaliation, I founded the Patient Safety Whistleblower Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting healthcare workers who report patient abuse, neglect, or criminal activity. We provide legal support, mental health resources, and advocacy for nurses, doctors, and staff who face retaliation for speaking up. In the 3 years since Dr. Holloway's conviction, our organization has helped 127 healthcare whistleblowers fight back against wrongful termination, defamation, and institutional cover-ups. We've successfully pressured 17 hospitals to implement stronger reporting protocols and independent oversight. We've helped pass legislation in 4 states protecting medical whistleblowers from retaliation, and we've exposed 3 other cases of healthcare professionals committing patient abuse and the institutions that tried to cover it up. I won't lie and say it's been easy. The medical establishment doesn't like people who challenge its authority. I've been sued twice for defamation, lawsuits that were eventually dismissed but cost me tens of thousands in legal fees. I've received death threats. Some of my old colleagues still won't speak to me, believing I betrayed the profession by airing dirty laundry publicly. But every time I feel discouraged, I think about Sarah Chen's 2 sons, who came to our office last year to thank me. They're teenagers now, growing up without their mother, but they wanted me to know that having the truth about her death mattered to them. I think about the 46 other families who finally got answers, who finally got to grieve properly, without the gnawing suspicion that something had been wrong. And I think about the patients who are alive today because someone spoke up. Someone refused to be silenced. Someone believed that truth and justice were worth any personal cost. My father used to tell me that the measure of a person is what they do when they see something wrong. For a long time after his death, I struggled with guilt, wondering if I'd lived up to his values, if I'd done enough, if I'd made him proud. I know now that I have. Because I saw something wrong and I didn't look away. I paid a terrible price. My career, my reputation, my financial security, nearly my life. But I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Last month, I was invited to speak at a nursing conference in Chicago. Standing at that podium, looking out at 2,000 healthcare workers, I told my story from beginning to end. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then one nurse stood up. Then another. Then the entire room rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, 17 nurses came to me privately to report concerns about their own institutions. Concerns they'd been too afraid to voice before. That's why I do this work. Because silence protects abusers, and speaking up, even when it costs everything, saves lives. Today, I'm 42 years old. I live in a small apartment in Baltimore, still in the city where this all began. I'm not wealthy. Advocacy work doesn't pay like nursing did, and I'm still paying off the legal bills from fighting the hospital's retaliation. But I'm at peace in a way I never was before. I sleep soundly at night, knowing that I did the right thing. That I fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. That I refused to let injustice win. My daughters, who are now 19 and 21, tell their friends that their mom is a hero. For a long time, I dismissed that. I didn't feel like a hero, just someone who did what had to be done. But I've come to understand that maybe that's what heroism really is. Not wanting to do the hard thing. Not enjoying the sacrifice, but doing it anyway because it's right. If you're listening to this and you work in healthcare, I want you to know something. You are not alone. If you see something wrong, if you're being pressured to stay silent, if you're being retaliated against for speaking up, there are people who will believe you, who will support you, who will fight alongside you. The Patient Safety Whistleblower Alliance has a hotline, legal resources, and a community of hundreds of people who understand what you're going through because we've been through it ourselves. Don't let them silence you. Don't let them make you doubt what you know to be true. Your voice matters. Your integrity matters. The patients who depend on you to be their advocate matter more than any career, any reputation, any institution. To Dr. Holloway, wherever you are in whatever maximum security prison holds you, you tried to erase me. You tried to make me invisible, to make me doubt my own sanity, to destroy me for daring to challenge you. But I'm still here. I'm still speaking, and every day I help ensure that no one else like you can do what you did. You were right about one thing. You did have power over life and death. But so did I, and I chose to use mine to save people, not to murder them for your own sick gratification. To everyone listening, thank you for being here, for witnessing this story, for believing that truth matters. Please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps me know that these stories are reaching people, that the message is spreading. Share this video if you believe in accountability, if you believe that no one is above the law, if you believe that healthcare workers who speak up deserve protection, not punishment. Subscribe to this channel because I'll keep telling these stories. There are more Dr. Holloways out there, more institutions that prioritize profit over patients, more whistleblowers who need support. This fight isn't over. 3 years ago, I lost everything, my career, my savings, my sense of safety. But I gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I stood up when it mattered. That I fought for the truth even when the entire system tried to crush me. That I valued human life over my own comfort. That's not a trade I would ever take back. My name is Rebecca Torres. I am 42 years old. I was a nurse for 18 years before I became a whistleblower. I watched a doctor murder patients, and I refused to stay silent. They tried to destroy me for it. But I'm still here. And I always will be. Because some truths are worth fighting for, no matter what they cost. And justice, real justice, is always worth the price. Thank you for listening. Now go out there and be brave. Speak up when you see something wrong. Protect the vulnerable. Stand up to power. The world needs more people who refuse to look away. Be one of them.